the last episode was about how I got here, this one is about what here actually looks like. Living disabled in the UK means adapting constantly. It means budgeting down to every penny, learning new ways to function, losing things potentially forever, and fighting like hell just to keep what's left. If you're joining for the first time, hi, I'm Becca and this is the Cripple Chronicles. In the last episode, I shared what it was like growing up poor in the west of Scotland, from dodgy electric and pre-marked clothing to skipping school trips and surviving emotional chaos. It wasn't just about money, but the mindset that comes with it. I talked about what happened after my accident, losing my leg, not making it back to the job that I loved, becoming disabled and navigating a benefit system that feels like it's built more for suspicion rather than support. This podcast isn't just about my life, it's about the systems that we all end up tangled in. If you are disabled or chronically ill or living off pay to pay on universal credit, this might sound painfully familiar. But even if your path is different, I hope you feel seen in some kind of way. And if you're not living in a life like this, I hope it helps you to at least understand. Before I go any further with this episode, I am going to ask, if this episode hits home or makes you think differently, please subscribe, leave a review on podcasting platforms, or send it to somebody who you think needs to hear it. You can drop me a message to cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Just follow along wherever you listen. If you have stories of your own or questions, or you just want to say hi, I want to hear them. I want this to be more like a conversation and not just me chatting into the ether. Let's just be clear. This episode is my take on what it means to live disabled within the UK benefit system. I am not speaking for every disabled person because this is not a one-size-fits-all experience. How you're treated in the system can base on your diagnosis, your postcode, your accent, your GP, your ability to self-advocate, your race, your gender, your support network or lack of one. But the issues that I really want to talk about today is the exhaustion, the degrading assessments, the constant justifying of your needs, and the impossible maths of trying to survive on less than £1,100 a month. Those things I do not think are just happening to me. According to Scope 2023, disabled people face on average extra costs of £975 per month, and nearly half of people in poverty in the UK are either disabled or living with someone who is. The system was never really built for us, and every reform seems to chip away at the little support that we have left. So if you're wondering why this episode feels personal, it's because it is, but it is also something that I'm not exactly one for doing a lot on the podcast, but it's political, because no one should have to be this strategic just to exist. No one should have to convince strangers in headsets that they deserve to eat, to shower safely, to live with some shred of dignity. In this episode, I want to break it all down: the history, the benefits, the costs, financial, emotional, physical. I want to share my story, bringing in some facts, and maybe at the end of it we'll be a little clearer on what things potentially need to change. Get comfy, grab some snacks, and let's get into it. We hear a lot in the UK about how proud we are of our NHS and the welfare state, and I get it. It is a big part of our national identity to have a national healthcare system that works for its people. But when you're disabled, the cracks stop being so philosophical because they become your daily reality. Cradle to grave, the dream that was sold. After World War II, the UK made a promise to its people, a commitment that you would be cared for from the cradle to the grave. This is a powerful phrase that came to life through the Beveridge Report, which was published in 1942, which tackled what it called the five giants: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. The result? The creation of the welfare system that aimed to catch people when they fell through the cracks. It was idealistic, ambitious, a collective act of hope, but that vision started to fray almost immediately. As early as the 1950s, charges were introduced for dental and optical services, things that had originally been free. Prescription charges came shortly after. Before they were abolished, the cost of a single prescription in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland was roughly £6.85 for Scotland, £6.65 for Wales, and £7.10 for Northern Ireland. Charges were abolished by the NHS Wales in 2007, Health and Social Care in Northern Ireland in 2010, and followed by NHS Scotland in 2011. But in England, prescription charges still remain in place, currently costing nearly £10 per item. If you live with chronic illness or disability, those charges can quickly become unaffordable, often racking up to over £120 a month just to access essential medication. It calls into question whether free at the point of need still actually holds true, especially when that need is constant and lifelong. While there are exemptions in place, such as for people with certain medical conditions, pregnant women, and those on low incomes, and individuals over 60, many disabled people don't qualify automatically. Others must navigate a maze of application processes just to access these exemptions. This creates a frustrating double bind. You may need medications daily to just function, but unless you fit a very specific criteria, you are still footing the bill. In that sense, the principle of universal access begins to feel more like a selective privilege than a guaranteed right. The fact that basic healthcare now has a price tag for so many in England creates a two-tier system. It's when survival is already being measured in pounds and pence. Every added cost feels like the system reminding you that you're not meant to thrive, just barely get by. From idealism to the ward floor. During my nursing training, we were taught about the Beveridge Report and free at the point of need, but we were also taught that everything revolved around 6 key values: care, compassion, competence, communication, courage, and commitment. The 6 C's. And these are not just words on a PowerPoint. We had modules on ethics, collaboration, on working within multidisciplinary teams. We were paired with physios, radiographers, doctors. We talked endlessly about person-centred care. We were shaped to see every patient as a whole person, not a diagnosis or a bed number. And for a while, I really believed in that version of the NHS. I thought, if I bring compassion, if I stay switched on, I can make a real difference. But what I experienced on the wards didn't match that training. I saw nurses using outdated techniques, and when asked why, I was told this is how it has always been done. In MDT meetings, I saw consultants override the advice of nurses who'd spent far more time with the patient. On my hub placement in a rehab ward, I saw only 2 patients get discharged in that 3 years. The rest stayed because there was nowhere else for them to go. The system had failed them, and it had essentially warehoused them. It was especially painful because I was still holding on to the hope that I'd been taught. I thought maybe the cracks were just because I was a student. But the closer I got to registration, the more I realised that this wasn't a fluke, that this was the system, and it was breaking the people inside of it, staff and patients alike. Then my accident happened and I wasn't the nurse anymore. I was the patient, and I thought that knowing the system would help me, that I could advocate for myself, that staff would treat me with the same care that I used to give my own patients. They didn't. I was left in pain. My concerns about my morphine pump were ignored for hours. I was told I had a little blood infection, and it was only later, after I'd requested my medical notes, that I'd discovered I had sepsis from my PICC line. Nobody told me. Nobody explained. The communication, the compassion, the duty of care, it wasn't there. And I wasn't a stranger to this system. I had walked the same corridors as a professional, committed to patient care, believing deeply in the values that I'd been trained in. That only made this betrayal feel sharper. I wasn't just let down, I was actively harmed. And it wasn't just me. Friends of mine, other disabled people, have been mistreated, gaslit, dismissed, and traumatised in settings that are supposed to help them. People who were scared, unwell, in pain, facing indifference or even hostility at times from the very people that were meant to care for them. The NHS still has so many good people like me as a nurse who are just trying their best, but they're trapped in a system that doesn't allow them to give the care that they really want to. A system that makes empathy a liability and burnout an absolute certainty. And once you're on the receiving end of that neglect, when you know in the bones that the place you were supposed to be safe could have killed you, it really changes everything. The rhetoric of reform versus reality of cuts. The language government uses about benefits is so careful, so sanitised. They talk about modernising, streamlining, making systems fairer. But what actually happens? Incapacity benefit becomes ESA. ESA becomes universal credit. DLA is replaced by PIP. PIP is then split into England and Scotland having ADP. And every time this system changes, it seems to get harder. The forms get longer, the criteria get stricter, the bar for eligibility rises. Claimants are treated like suspect. Every application assumes bad faith. It's not about helping people live independently, but making sure that no one gets away with anything. This isn't reform, it's erosion, and it feels like it's deliberate. That erosion doesn't happen in sweeping statements or headline-grabbing policies. It's slow and quiet, and bit by bit, a funding freeze, a policy tweak there, an assessment centre moved miles away with no public transport, or up a flight of stairs with no lift. Because your assessment starts from the car, not from the moment that you're in that room. It's death by 1,000 bureaucratic paper cuts. And in that erosion, people are harmed. People fall through the gaps. People lose income. People lose housing. People die. And this isn't just hypothetical. There are coroner's reports and inquests confirming it, and still it keeps happening. When we talk about cutting costs, we have to be honest about where those costs are really being cut. Support, safety nets, and in some cases, actively people's lives. Not every country does it this way. In Nordic countries like Sweden, Finland, and Norway, support for disabled people includes personal assistance and a focus on independent living. In the Netherlands, care is a right, not a reward for ticking enough boxes. New Zealand factors in the cost of disability when deciding what people are entitled to, not just whether they meet a rigid checklist. Meanwhile, in the UK, most of the focus is on fraud prevention. Every part of the benefit system is built around suspicion. We invest more energy on trying to catch someone cheating the system than we do supporting those who actually need it to live. Even within the UK, your access to care depends on where you live. A disabled person in Glasgow won't pay for prescriptions, but someone in Leeds might spend £100 a month on the same meds. That is not a healthcare system, it is a postcode lottery. A little bit on the Scottish cringe. As mentioned in the last episode, in Scotland, there is a cultural trait, sometimes called the Scottish cringe, and this is an instinct to keep your head down, to not make a fuss, and to accept less than you deserve and feel guilty for wanting more. Disabled people shouldn't have to be expected to be grateful for scraps. We're not a burden, we're not scroungers, we are not statistics on a government spreadsheet. We are people, and if a system is built to support us in failing, then we have every right to say so, because dignity, autonomy, and equality are not luxuries. These are the bare minimum, and a lot of people feel like they're not even getting that, or they have to fight to do so. Living with a price tag. Scope's 2024 Disability Price Tag Report lays it bare. On average, disabled households in the UK face extra costs of £1,010 per month. That is not an optional lifestyle choice. It is something that most people did not choose, because we don't choose to become disabled. It just happens one day, and then you have to deal with survival. Even after benefits are factored in, these households still have £236 less disposable income per month than non-disabled households. Let that sink in. You're already trying to stretch every single pound. Now subtract £236 and add on £1,000 of extra costs. And you might think, what are these costs going towards? It's not luxury, it's not high-end tech or extravagant holidays. It is things like specialist equipment, wheelchairs, hoists, shower chairs, mobility scooters, accessible transport, taxis instead of buses, adapted vehicles, or home delivery charges. Increased energy usage, because being housebound often means heating your house more, having the lights on, paying more for electric, charging medical equipment, using lifts or hoists, higher food costs, especially if you have dietary needs, allergies, or can't cook from scratch, and then add on top paid care or support when public services fall short. For a lot of disabled people, even just leaving the house comes with a cost. Taxis to medical appointments, parking at hospitals, delivery charges for some medications, small things that a lot of people wouldn't even think about, yet it all accumulates into something massive. This figure, £1,010, has come up before in a previous episode, I think, where I talked about benefits, but hearing it again in the context of rising costs and shrinking support makes it feel even more brutal, especially when it is clear that our benefit system doesn't come close to bridging that gap. Universal credit and the conditional catch-22. Let's talk a bit about universal credit, UC. It is meant to be a modern solution to welfare, but the reality, this is a bureaucratic maze with built-in traps. As of early 2025, around 58% of universal credit claimants live in households that include a disabled person. So when we start to talk about benefit changes, disabled people are very much at the centre of it. But over 2 million of those claimants are in conditionality regimes, meaning that they are subject to rules, job search expectations, and the threat of sanctions. Even if someone is too unwell to work full-time, they may still be pushed to prove that they are trying hard enough to get back into work. This creates an exhausting and often hostile system. Missing an appointment because you're unwell, sanctioned. Send the wrong form, sanctioned. Me changing my name, sanctioned. Had to go to the job centre to prove that I had my birth certificate and my bank details, and ended up getting paid late. Not trying hard enough because, according to an assessor who spent 20 minutes with you on the phone, yep, you guessed it, sanctioned. And those sanctions have consequences. Missed rent, empty fridges, missed meds, missed hope. Apply to the fact that over 60% of UC claimants are having debt repayments deducted straight from their benefits, usually around £62 per month. And the math then gets even worse. And see that £62 per month, that can sometimes be from the advance. Oh, again, I keep hitting my microphone today. That can then sometimes be from the advanced payments that you need to get from Universal Credit before you actually start getting your Universal Credit during the time where they're assessing you. So then you're paying off the money that they had to give you and the time that it takes to be assessment. How does that not feel like punishment? People who are already barely scraping by are getting charged for the privilege. It doesn't stop there. The Resolution Foundation found that people who are disabled and out of work are around £2,800 worse off per year under Universal Credit compared to the old benefit system. So next time somebody says Universal Credit is generous for paying your rent and giving you £700, £800, ask them to explain how nearly £3,000 less a year is generous to somebody who already can't work due to their health. This then adds into mental health and the cost of surviving. It's not just a money problem, it can be a mental health crisis. Studies have shown the direct link between the rollout of universal credit and increased rates in depression and anxiety. Disabled people already face higher rates of mental illness due to isolation, stigma, pain, and fatigue. Add relentless financial insecurity and the stress of hostile assessments, and it's no wonder that people on benefits tend to feel pretty fucking hopeless. Being poor is exhausting. Being disabled is exhausting. Being disabled and poor whilst navigating a benefit system that feels like it is designed to make you feel like a liar and a failure. That's a recipe for burnout, breakdown, collapse, and hitting crisis point. It's important to remember that this doesn't just happen by accident. There's policies. The UK removed an estimated £37 billion from the welfare system between 2010 and 2021. That's not just money disappearing from spreadsheets. It is real, tangible support being ripped away from the lives of real people who need it. The so-called bedroom tax that was introduced, this disproportionately hit disabled people, penalised them for needing an extra room for a carer or mobility equipment because, independence is fine as long as it fits into the criteria that the government has for you. When people ask, why do disabled people keep talking about money? This is why. Because without enough money to survive, every other right becomes meaningless. Every statistic that I have mentioned tells a story. Being disabled in the UK is expensive, and the systems that are meant to support us are doing the financial equivalent of slashing our tyres and then asking why the car's not moving forward. Once you learn how expensive it is to live with a disability, the next question is, what help is out there to cover these extra costs? In England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, there is personal independent payment, which is referred to as PIP, and in Scotland, there has recently been a switch over from DWP to Social Security Scotland, and now we are in receipt of adult disability payment. These payments are meant to support people with extra expenses that come with being disabled. And if you're imagining a smooth and helpful system, think again. You're probably not, from the fact that I'm now, an hour and a half into speaking about the system and how it can impact people. Instead of feeling supported, applying for these benefits can feel like you're on trial. You're expected to describe your worst day in detail, explain how your condition affects your daily life, step by step, going in to talk about your mental health, if there is any thoughts of harming yourself, suicidal ideation, what dissociation feels like to you. And if you go through and describe all of these things and you don't have a diagnosis, they will come back and say, it's very hard that you experience this, but you need to basically have a medical professional back you up, or else, nah, you're just saying it. You need to justify why you can't do tasks that other people find easy, provide proof for things that are hard to explain, like I just mentioned, pain, exhaustion, brain fog. You need to explain these things in detail, how they impact you, and then most of the time, you need to have somebody in a medical background that is going to write a letter in support to apply for PIP so that they are adequately convinced. And even then, it doesn't always work out. If your condition doesn't fit neatly into the boxes on the form, you're at a disadvantage from the start. If you think about conditions like ME or chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, these often don't come with straightforward language or reasons why it has happened or ways to get better. I think another one that's coming into my head right now is FND. With these conditions, like any dynamic, complex illness or disability, the system isn't really set up for nuance. It's built around fixed criteria, checklists, black and white, but that's so hard when a lot of our life exists in grey areas. A lot of assessments can be carried out by private companies such as Capita or ATOS and independent assessment services. These companies are paid by the government to do disability benefit assessments, but there has been serious questions raised about how good or accurate that these assessments actually are. Reports from the National Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee have found problems with assessor training, poor medical knowledge, and possible pressure to cut costs. Assessors often don't have much background in the condition that they are judging. Someone without training in mental health could be making the decisions about someone who is diagnosed with schizophrenia, a personality disorder, bipolar, PTSD, and that's terrifying. There's also a double standard that exists here. Lately, you might have heard or actually know some people that have been denied ADHD medication after private diagnoses, being told that they need an NHS diagnosis instead. So if private healthcare isn't being trusted in this case, why are private companies being trusted with decisions about disability benefits that impact the entirety of your life? It just feels a bit backwards. It raises doubts about whether the system is actually about care or just cutting costs and saving money. And the system gets it wrong a lot. If we look back in 2022, the Disability News Service reported that over 70% of PIP appeals are successful. More than half of the first-time PIP claims are rejected. That means hundreds of thousands of people are being told that they don't qualify, only to be later told that after appeal they actually do. And why does this actually matter? Why am I bringing it up and sounding so serious or agitated about it? Because if so many of these decisions are overturned, it clearly shows that there's a serious problem with the way that assessments are being done in the first place. And for every person who appeals and wins, there are others who just don't have the energy, the time, the support to fight, the resources, and they are just left without the money that they need to live, and choosing survival because they don't have any other options at the moment. Appealing can take weeks, sometimes months, to build yourself up, to go through the decision, to write down all of the things you disagree with. If it's past 13 weeks, then you also need to write down why it has taken you longer than 13 weeks to go through all of this information and process it and go through the trauma and anxiety and dread of going through all of this and potentially to be declined. Then you've got me who has short-term memory problems sometimes. Filled out my form, took it down to Leeds with me. Well, I took it down to Leeds with me twice before because me and Eleanor were going to fill it out together. Didn't get to it. Sat and filled it out myself, wrote it all out, put it in the envelope, and then I lost the envelope for like 3 weeks because I put it inside of a book on a shelf thinking that would be safe and I wouldn't lose it, but I forgot where I put it. And then I sent it away and I received an email to say we should have a decision within 56 days. With that, we are going to have to call you and go through any information and see if you have information from medical professionals that backs up what you have said within your appeal. And this caused a lot of anxiety for me. I think I might have it in the notes. I don't know if I did or if I talked about it in the last episode. But so much anxiety because I've not really had to go through an assessment process since 2021, 2022. It's just been forms and being told that your benefit's the same, you'll get reassessed at this point. And I was really anxious that it was going to be like a phone call, an assessment. And they phoned me yesterday when I was having a jaw flare up and he'd asked if it was a good time to talk. And because I didn't know what it was, I'm sitting there with an ice pack on my face, like hardly being able to think and saying like, yep, that's fine. The guy then tells me that I have gone through the whole form, but they've not been able to process it because I didn't sign the form. So he went through and gave me verbal confirmation to sign it, which is good because if they sent it back for me to sign it, that could have been another 3 to 6 weeks added on by the time I sign it, put it back in the envelope, take it out and remember to post it, because part of it was I took the letter out with me like 3 times and didn't find a post box, and then I had to specifically go out of the house just to go to the post box to know that I had posted my form. Do you get what I'm getting at here? It's a lot of mental gymnastics and hurdles to get over when you're being told by healthcare professionals that you meet the criteria, but then you fill it out and they say, actually, you don't meet the criteria, but then 70% of people who appeal end up do meeting the criteria. It might sound confusing in the way that I've just put it, but it might also make sense of why this gets under my skin and irks me and why it's something that I do feel passionate about, because it leaves me wondering, like the days where I'm researching, I'm in pain, I'm not able to leave the house because I don't have money, I'm stretching money to last me a week to get to when I get paid. I can't wait until 4 p.m. because I get my money a few days early with Monzo and I can pay back people that I've borrowed off of to be able to afford groceries. Like going round a shop with £25, the really depressing part of it for me was I'm getting so annoyed that my gases are going. Like last week when I was in the shop and I'd borrowed money off Eleanor, the part that really got to me was I was going around the shop with a scan in shop. I keep bumping the microphone today. I feel like I need to be a bit further back or something. But I was going round with a scan in shop, making sure that I wasn't going over how much money I had in my bank account. And the really sad part for me was that I picked up a big bag of go-cat food for Simba because it was like more food, more money, but it was like a better price per kilo than for the small box of food. So I put it in, I went round, I grabbed like my bread, my potato scones, my juice, and as I was doing it I realised that it was going to be over what I had in my bank account, what I had left in my overdraft. So I had to go back. I had to put back the bag of cat food and pick up the box instead. I had to put down the 8 rolls of toilet paper and pick up 4 because it's just for me to get through the week, right? And why is that an okay way to live? Like, during the time it takes for people to apply for PIP, people to appeal for it, people go without vital support that they need. They don't have money for care, they don't have money for transport, they have their family to depend on. But if their family's strapped for cash with, like, a lot of people right now, I feel like we are going into a recession. There is a lot of people who are really struggling with money. I've seen a lot of stuff about Klarna and pay in 3, pay it later, that over like 30% of Klarna debts over £80 are people buying their shopping. And that is just wild that that is the place that we're in. But then if there are people at the bottom and they don't have family to support them and they don't have any extra money and they are really relying on the help from the government and the benefits, it can mean that when you're denied PIP or ADP, it's not just about being denied for a benefit or I've missed out on that one and I can apply for that one. It can mean losing the access to a mobility car, being disqualified from other linked benefits, perhaps not being able to get a blue badge because you need to be in receipt of disability payment, getting pushed further into debt. And I think of it, me as someone who is a single person, I only have me and my cat to look after, and I struggle with that and I go without. But I think of the people who have kids that they need to look after, that are potentially single parents, that the other parent takes their kid once a week but doesn't provide the finances for them. I'd never want to see my kid go without, and that would mean that disabled parents then go without. They skip meals to put food on the plate for their children. And even if it's not a point of putting food on the plate for their kids, they've got food, but they still might need to skip meals or avoid things like, for me, getting my cleaning done £20 a week so that their kid can go to a trampoline park or go on a day out with their pals. It's not just unfair, it's harmful, and these things are happening every single day. And that's why I'm talking about it, because these are the thoughts that have been going through my mind, and I feel like I'm not the only person that's struggling. I'm not the only person that knows struggle like this. And I also know that I'm not somebody who is in the complete worst off of situations. I'm going a bit off of my notes here because it's something that plays on my mind a lot, and I feel like it is something that needs to be spoken about. Like I'd kind of said at the start of this episode, that this is my experience whilst living in the benefit system, trying to, like, I tried to claw my way out of the poverty that I seen growing up and that was happening in houses around me with friends and other people, and this kind of push and drive to do better. But it does feel really entrapping when you're disabled, when you're trying to figure out where your limitations lie and what is actually possible, and worrying that if I can get into full-time work, if I need to take part-time work because of my disability, it will impact my benefits, because a lot of part-time work that is not 0-hour contracts, it's over 16 hours. So it starts to take money off of that. And any way that you're moving forward, it feels like you're just pushing against constant resistance. It's something where I say, I know I'm not at the worst. I've got a house over my head. Before I started my debt management plan, I never missed a single payment. I never defaulted. None of that. But that was because I put priority of paying my debts over like things that I needed for daily life, things that I needed for comfort, getting clothes, shoes, perfume, like things that I mentioned earlier, like colouring books, art supplies. Sometimes it is something where I have a bit of extra money and I'm able to buy that, but a lot of the times I wasn't able to, and it's something where I have gratitude for having a roof over my head. And although I might eat the same meals and like it's consistent, it's affordable, but it's also something where I feel like, is this going to be my life forever? Thinking about how I can raise funds, thinking about if I do a half marathon, can I raise funds? I never want to be somebody that's like dry begging or asking for money, because that's not me. It feels wrong. I don't want to ask for money just for existence. I feel like I need to do something for it. I've tried like kind of selling pieces of art and stuff like that, but it's something that there's always that anxiety in the back of my mind. I want to help people. I want to go into advocacy. Do I want to go back to uni? How do a budget for these life choices? How do I manage to get ahead when I'm barely making it month to month? But the part of this and me kind of going off script is because it feels like that to me, but the reason why I did the last episode and this episode is because I know I'm not the worst off. I know there are disabled single parents that can't work and they have kids, and that's a bigger stressor. There are people who have housing insecurity, or they are financially dependent on somebody who might be potentially abusive because of how the system works. It is something where I have a lot of passion and I have a lot of anger, annoyance, overwhelmed feelings about how the system is set up and how a lot of people just suffer. And I'm going to get it to later on, like I'd mentioned, Norway and other places kind of doing it different. I had a bit of a look on what those differences can actually look like. And I'm somebody that I know, I've said this before, like, even now I'm coming up to 50 episodes of the podcast, but I still have a very small platform. I don't have even like 100 subscribers. One of my videos, the most views that one of my videos has is like nearly 700 views. And all of those things feel massive to me because I like yapping, I like doing this, like I like sharing my experience about things and knowing that I'm not the only person out there that feels like that. Like, people might resonate with some things, not exactly, because everybody's story is different, but it's something where there are voices talking about it. And I do feel like this probably is more of a thing on TikTok, kind of short, snappy content where people can have their takes on it or they show what their life's like. For me, TikTok's one of those places where it can be a total time hole, and sometimes I can end like, although I can find community and not feeling alone, I can also see people out there who have jobs or who are making money and they're able to do not even like crazy extravagant things, but just kind of exploring and being able to get out and do different things. It feels unfair. I've been saying since I had my accident, like, for a point, I really didn't know what my purpose was, because nursing was my purpose. Nursing was the thing that kept me going. Without nursing, I probably would have been dead a long time ago. And I would say to everybody, I'm going to get back to it. Maybe it'll be in a different capacity. Even with the treatment that I sustained within the first 2 years of my recovery, the detachment from nursing didn't come. I was going to have my leg and it might be fused, but I'll find a way, I'll find a place that fits me for nursing. I want to be in a ward, I don't want to be in a community setting. But then it was thinking about practicalities, like within mental health, there's restraint, which is another topic that I have opinions on, but some hours shifts can be spent rolling about, restraining patients. How do I do that with a fused leg? If there's to be a CPR incident, how do I safely get down onto the floor and back up to navigate that situation? As somebody who would be a target for unwell people because I come across as the most vulnerable. If I wasn't using a wheelchair, I would be slower on my feet. If I was using my wheelchair, it could be seen as a point of weakness in some patients' eyes and could potentially make me a target. And it's all of these things, as well as my treatment within the NHS and general nursing, that really kind of made me realise that I couldn't go back. The person that I am now would see too many things happening that it just feels like I'm complicit. But also, it was part of something that made me realise that my purpose is just being me. And the reason why I say the first year and a half, I kind of buffered on that for a minute when I was talking about it, because I said like the first 2 years, and then I was like, no, I had the frame for 8 months and then got my infection and then my leg fused, and then it was like 2 years after that. But the reason why I initially said 2 years is because the group that I was a part of, that me and Eleanor became friends, like, I remember saying to friends that I had made in that group that I just can't wait until I can go back to nursing and I can actually help people and I can make a difference. Even when I started to think about counselling, that was the kind of narrative. And a lot of my friends said to me, Becca, you make a difference in my life just being my friend. Like, you make a difference every day when you make me smile or you laugh or you listen to me or you just be your silly, goofy self. Like, it can light up my days. And that was when, I mean, it took quite a few times of people saying it to me, but I started to realise that it wasn't about nursing, it was about who I was as a person and what I could bring to my relationships. My purpose is being a friend to people, being a mentor, being an advocate, whether that's for myself at the moment or for my pals or in a professional capacity or on the podcast or just sharing information or waiting for the bus and being dressed up with my colourful hair and my makeup on and people saying to me, you've actually brightened up my day by seeing me. That was what the purpose became, and it's something where I know that I can do that with the financial state that I'm in, but I also know that I can look at it and say that the system doesn't work for a lot of people. There are stats that say it. I remember before becoming disabled, there was a reform or a cut or an adaptation or a restriction on how much was being spent on welfare benefits, people just not wanting to work and like how much unemployment there was. And a lot of people ended up going back to work. And I can remember I can remember stories on the news about people being forced back to work when they weren't healthy, people that had diagnoses like cancer or MS, and them dying because they were forced to work. Their life was significantly shorter than it should have been because of the system. That is why these episodes are a bit longer, why I'm passionate, why I'm sharing these kind of stories and thought processes, because the system can be very black and white. You either tick the checkbox or you don't, but people's lives are not that black and white. There is a lot of grey, nuanced area where people deserve support and they shouldn't have to spend a massive amount of energy to get that support. I'm gonna take a stretch break because I've been recording for an hour. Oopsies about that little segue. I hope what I said kind of made sense, because I was really just rolling, no notes in front of me. I did actually think I was going to be on track for having this episode round about the same length as the last one. Looking at my notes, I was like, ooh. Now, I mean, when I started, because of all of the things that I wanted to say and all of the background information I've just given you, I did think this episode was going to be like an hour and a half. Like, that's the amount of energy I put aside for last episode and this episode was that they could potentially both be an hour and a half long. When I started doing this episode, I thought, wow, I'm really flying through this. Maybe it's only going to be an hour. And then I started yapping, and to be honest, after having a stretch and going to pee and grabbing a drink, I can't even remember what I said. So that's going to be fun for editing, Becca. Let's get back on track with this episode. And what I'm going to talk about next, have a little new title for this part of the section. Whatever, I need some way to bring myself back, because tangents are always hard to kind of find your footing again. ADP, is it a better alternative or is it just the same as PIP? In Scotland, things did change a bit with adult disability payment. So the Department of Work and Pensions no longer runs the assessments for Scotland. The Scottish Government says the new system should be more respectful, with fewer face-to-face assessments and have more evidence from the person's own health team. The tone is a little bit more gentle, and I guess the questions could be less accusatory and like how people feel, and that does help, I guess. When you're filling out a form, you're wanting to just I was going to say you want to fill it out as openly with as much information as possible, but then also thinking that you're still having to fill it out as openly as possible, but remembering that we're talking about on your absolute worst day. But the system, ADP, still uses the point-based structure exactly like PIP. So if you're 1 point short for qualifying for more support, you're still left struggling. You still have to appeal, and it still hurts and is exhausting. I know, because I've been there and I've already said a little bit about it, but let's talk more about this 1 point. I've been disabled since 2019. For a period, I was completely bedbound. I had carers. I couldn't leave my house without assistance or being in patient transport. I couldn't shower. I used a commode and washed myself and my hair in the sink for over 2 years. I moved And things also got better after my amputation, but I still need support. I use my prosthetic, but I also rely on things like a shower chair, occupational therapist, making my home more accessible. Multiple healthcare professionals have told me that I should qualify for the enhanced rate of daily living. But when Pip moved to ADP, we got like a letter sent out informing us that it was happening. And then you got a form out basically like, you're now under Social Security Scotland. So write down if there's any change of circumstances that we need to be aware about, basically. When I first applied, I actually don't know what the points were. Like, I just took what I was given. I know I met the enhanced rate for mobility. However, when it comes to later on and I move and I then am able to drive again and I get my mobility car, that money all goes to mobility. I don't see any of it. So the daily living became more noticeable after I got my car in September of 2023. But like I said, I've been disabled since December of 2019. And at first doing the application form, it did feel like a trick, even though I had, in the last episode, I'd said about getting discharged and having a woman to help me through the forms. It was being asked, what help would I need if I had the support? Like, it feels like it's a weird question to answer because, like I said, at first I was just relieved to get anything. And then over time, with people telling me, I'm really sorry if you can hear noise in the background, Simba has just decided to take a shit whilst I've been talking about this. And I'm like, I literally had 10 minutes where I stretched and I went to the toilet and I got a drink and I came back and I get situated and he's decided now to go for a shit. So let me reverse and try to put myself back where I was because he's still going and it's throwing me off track. So I've darted out about a little bit about when I got Pip and kind of when I realised about the daily living wasn't a lot to live on. Jesus. So I've done a bit of back and forth about first applying for Pip and getting help and the switch over, and that being when I first kind of was aware of the points that I was getting for daily living and actually seeing about having more points if I explained better what was going on, especially without having a prosthetic, being a full-time wheelchair user, struggling more with my chronic pain. There were changes that had happened that I felt more so added to the points system for daily living. So I went through all of that, but there's also other times filling out forms and stuff like that. So when I moved, it was round about the time for my first reassessment for Pip. So I had got in contact with them to let them know about my change of address. They sent me a form and I remember filling it out. This is a bit different because I was filling it out before my leg got amputated. So this was 2022. So we're kind of like start to mid of 2022. I am being reassessed and I am filling out what things are like being in a different house, my bathroom being adapted, like the carer support, etc. I don't really think I looked too much into it at that point. However, I then got my leg amputated and I'm like, okay, well, that's a big change of circumstances. I knew that I had to phone them. So this started when I was in the hospital. I think 3 times I tried to phone them. It got to about 45, 50 minutes on the call of hold music and sorry, we're busy, we'll get to you soon, you can do this online, whatever, all of the other jargon it says when you are on the phone to DWP because it still hadn't moved to Social Security Scotland. That's something that's been in like the last year. So it kept cutting me off. I must have tried to phone them about 5 times or something before I finally got through. So that was about 4 hours of time across 5 phone calls. I was eventually home when I managed to get through to them. And I don't even think I was on the phone for 5 minutes. I phoned up, I said, I need to report a change of circumstances. I've had my leg amputated. They just said, okay, I've noted that in the system. And that was it. And I'm like, okay. I just kind of go with it because I don't know what else I'm meant to do in that situation. And the reason why they had done that is because when I phoned back up to check, because I was like, I phoned up to tell you this and I don't know if you need to send me like a form out because things are going to be different now that I've had my leg amputated. And they said, no, we've already got your form. And I'm like, yeah, but that form was filled out when I had the frame on my leg. They just said that they'll process that. It's on the system that I'm an amputee. I got a letter that it had been extended till 2025 sometime, I don't know. And in the last year when it changed from, it can get a little bit confusing, can't it, with all of the forms and the changes and phoning up and that's sorted, but then it switches from Department of Work and Pensions to Social Security Scotland and you get, I moved back so that I would stop dunting the mic when I've just caught it with my nail, another 32-page odd form or 86-page, I don't know what it is, a booklet that you need to fill out that's your form. Again, I explained my struggles, my pain, my lack in being able to look after myself, like feed myself properly, get in a shower, having to need adaptations for the house, but being on waiting lists, my prosthetic. Explained all of these things and the different areas where they were asking me the questions. And again, I got the response that took me a while to reappeal because I just felt so gutted. And I've taken a break and I need to go bloody find my charger because I put my laptop on low power mode and it's very Geez, really try to get everything organised and then things just happen. And when I went to the toilet, I stubbed my toe really hard off the wall and it hurts and I feel like I might have broken it, but there's like nothing they can do for broken toes, I think. And my big toe broke in the accident. They didn't notice, so it kind of just set in place. So, fucking hell. I've only got one foot in life. But do you know what? Still here, doing it. I could have really easily just stopped recording and tried to figure out what is going on today, but we're rolling with it. So before I had to go get my charger because my laptop nearly died, I was saying that it came back and that was a form that took me months because of pain, fatigue, taking it down to Leeds, coming back, not being able to bring myself to actually read what they said because I know most of it started off with like, what you've told us sounds really difficult, but you already get points for XYZ. Spot Simba in the background. Distracted by Simba again. So, again. So. It took me a while to muster up the courage because I've already given you points for XYZ, so you still remain with the same points. They did give me extra points, but it was still just 1 point under. With the email kind of saying that they were going to phone me, it did make my stomach drop. It felt like it was going to be some kind of trap and I was going to be interrogated or not helped. My leg is not going to grow back. If I could work right now, I would, but I need time to recover and stabilise and still at times I feel guilty for needing help. And even though PIP or ADP are not work-related benefits, I use mine to keep my head above water. It pays my debt repayment plan, and that debt was some poor financial decisions, but it was debts that I built up during some of the hardest years of my life. Applying for support does make you feel like you really need to prove your worth. If you're told that you don't qualify, you kind of start to believe me. Like I've said throughout this and going through all of the thought processes and kind of given some background and context of the way that I grew up, it took me a long time to believe that I was actually allowed to challenge the decision, and I had to actually believe that I deserved better. I got so used to strangers asking me about my frame, my wheelchair, my leg, my crutches, medical devices, and I got used to telling my story over and over to new doctors who didn't read my notes before they bothered to walk into the room. And I think eventually I did kind of really start to disconnect from the emotions because it was the only way to keep going. I think when horrible things happen, people from the outside often say, I have no idea how you got through that. And most of the time, the person that's got through it, they have no idea too, because you just do what needs to be done. The assessments for benefits often fail to understand how trauma, pain, and fatigue affect real life. Like I mentioned earlier about yesterday and having my ice pack on because I had a jaw pain flare. When I get that jaw pain, it spreads through my head and my neck. It makes it hard to think, to move, to speak. The kind of constant pain that just drains your energy, but it's intense that you can't sleep unless it dies down. And I think the system doesn't really make space for that reality. Sometimes people think that chronic pain is just an excuse, and it's not. People live through unbearable pain every single day and still don't get the help that they need. I think one thing I tend to kind of try and compare it to is toothache. Toothache is one of those pains that you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, it's like one of the worst kind of pains that you can experience. Imagine experiencing the worst toothache you have ever experienced and going to the dentist and them telling you, actually, no, we can't do anything for that. Going to the doctors and them saying, nah, we can't give you any antibiotics, just take some paracetamol and ibuprofen and it might die down. It's probably not going to die down because it's a bacterial infection. And then imagine going through that pain for months, for years, not being sure if it'll ever end, or if it does go away, there's slight relief, but is it just going to come back? When is it going to come back? How long have I got before that intense pain comes back? If you don't understand chronic pain, think of it in that way, or just think of the worst pain that you have ever actually felt in your body and remember what it felt like, and understand that people with chronic pain are living through that on a daily basis and still having to get up and survive and move forward and grow as people, and then also have this systemic weight upon them that they need to be in education or trying to work when they don't even know where they fit into the world as people. My friends were the thing that really kept me going. They reminded me that I wasn't being a scrounger, I wasn't being greedy, I was asking for what I was entitled to. And Yeah, I'm still scared. I'm still anxious every time I get an update or a letter about the benefits, but I don't feel alone anymore because I've learned how to show myself some compassion, and I learned that through therapy, but I also learned it through the love that my friends gave me. The benefits system is not just failing. It feels like this is how it is meant to operate. Since the early 2000s, there has been constant changes, cuts, freezes, confusing rebrands, reforms. Disability living allowance was replaced by PIP, not to help people but to be able to tighten the rules. It's a system built to turn people away, to make it harder, to save money, and it's doing exactly that. So once you manage to survive the assessment maze and actually get support, what happens next? How do benefits link to housing, poverty, and trying to build a future? Because the fight just doesn't stop if you get approved or if you get that extra point. It just kind of changes shape. A lot of things we see in the news are about trying to stop fraud within benefits. These benefits are actually ranked very low on where fraud is. 0.0% or 0.1% for those on PIP or DLA. I have just done a little bit searching mid recording because I was thinking about, I know the fraud rates are very low for DLA and PIP because probably because so many people get declined and then reinstated or like reviewed after they go against them. My brain is going, I'm nearly like 2 hours into recording. But there are people out there that will say, I don't mind paying taxes for people who really need it, but there's just so much fraud. Let's unpick it, because if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it 1,000 times, and it is usually aimed at people on disability or like just benefits. Like, some people believe those on benefits are out here wear luxury bathrobes and lighting our candles with £20 notes. That's not the reality of it though. The actual fraud rate for disability benefits like PIP and DLA is basically zero, and I'm not exaggerating. The fraud rate for DLA is 0.1%, and for PIP it is zero. Round it up, round it down, still zero. So if you're picturing folk faking disabilities for money, looking at somebody in a wheelchair and being like, oh my god, they moved their leg, they're faking it, you're thinking of a stereotype, not a reality. However, if we look at housing rate, the fraud rate can be a bit higher. I saw some numbers between like 3.9 and 6%, and it does sound like a lot until you realise it translates to about £600 million. And honestly, that's a big chunk of money. A good chunk of that is not someone trying to pull a fast one. It's often people trying to survive within a confusing system that changes the goalposts every 5 minutes. And then you've got universal credit, where fraud is probably the highest. I saw numbers ranging from about 10.9% to I think 13.9%, or that accumulates to around £5.7 billion. So that one is a problem. But instead of tighten the hypothetical noose on claimants with even more complex paperwork or terrifying letters, I think the question probably is, how is it so easy for some people to exploit whilst a lot of us feel like we're drowning in it? Because let's be real, universal credit is built on a system that is digital first, can be really confusing, and assumes that everyone's tech savvy and can deal with paperwork well. But also, there are checks and balances that can be often applied unevenly. If you are genuinely too ill to work or disabled and navigating fluctuating health, your life becomes a game of trying to be able to provide constant proof to back up what you're saying. You're uploading your doctor's letters, putting in your journal about attending work capacity assessments, explaining why your mobility doesn't just magically return on a random Wednesday afternoon, managing disability and all of the things that come along with it, applying for benefits, keeping up with hospital appointments. If you don't have a car, maintaining phoning up and asking for patient transport to get you to and from appointments. But they also have other people that they work around. So sometimes you might be sitting in the hospital for 2 hours waiting for your patient transport to come back because they had to pick up somebody else. It's a full-time job. And on top of that, you also basically have a full-time job of trying to prove that you can't do a full-time job. It really is exhausting. However, I'm not stupid to the fact that there are people out there that can figure out to say the right things and tick the right boxes and maybe blur a few details, and they're able to sail through the system without being scrutinised. They know how to fly under the radar, and I feel like that's where it gets messy. It's not actually easy to defraud the system if you're vulnerable or honest. In fact, it's almost impossible. But if you're confident, not particularly honest, not really bothered if it comes back to bite you in the arse, and know how to manipulate the gaps in the system, it seems like it's probably possible. The problem isn't that it's too easy to get support. The system wasn't designed to support the people who need it most. It was designed to deter people, to weed out, to test people, to trip people up, which in return ends up punishing the wrong people entirely. So people who don't want to work, they might slide through, but the ones that can't work, we get grilled like we're lying. And even when we've got a paper trail that you could follow back years, it just shouldn't be this hard to access the help that you're entitled to. It shouldn't make you anxious every time that there's a brown envelope in the postie's hand, and it definitely shouldn't be a system that makes it harder to survive because you're being honest. It's not enough just to be approved for PIP or EDP. That's just the start. Once I got support, I was still faced with an impossible budget on paper. Benefits should help manage the added cost of disability. In practice, many of us are surviving, not living. Let's break it down. According to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, nearly 30% of disabled people in the UK live in poverty. That is 10 percentage points higher than non-disabled people. And it's not just income. In 2023, the same foundation found that 7 in 10 low-income disabled households went without essentials like heating, toiletries, or food. Here's how it looks like for me. My rent is covered by my universal credit, my house and benefit, but my bills come to around £200 a month. My groceries, you're talking £250 to £300 a month. There's fuel for my car to get places, and then there's weed to manage my pain because smoking helps to ease my pain. In the past 3 months, I have spent £110 on myself. A colouring book, a Switch game, and a couple of bits and pieces from B&M. That's not a luxury. I'm constantly deciding between, am I going back into my overdraft or stocking the fridge? Some days I've managed to stretch food across 3 days or fell asleep and just skipped dinner entirely. It's exhausting, and the pressure to justify living like this to strangers, to the system, to anyone who doesn't get it, it's soul crushing. People act like relying on benefits is a lifestyle choice, which I understand. for those people that I mentioned that don't want to work and think they can earn more money claiming benefits when they have the capacity to work, I get it. But for me, it's not a choice, it's survival. Like I said, if I could work, I would. But healing takes time. Managing my disability feels like a full-time job. And I'm not dragging this out. I'm doing what I can survive. And I'm I'm trying. I mentioned earlier about Scope's disability price tag. This report says that on average, disabled households spend £978 extra a month in costs. 1 in 5 people face over an extra £1.5 grand a month. But what is that money actually being spent on? Mobility aids, a pair of crutches that aren't your standard grey NHS issue. You can be talking £80 a crutch. Push rims for my wheelchair, the kind to handle Scottish rain, £50 to £60. Heating like an electric blanket, absolutely vital for chronic pain, £60. Heating your house when it's colder, the bills end up adding up. Private treatments, for me, for example, I was getting medical cannabis from Curaleaf, but the cost became impossible. The NHS pain team declined me because I was taking Curaleaf and basically told me that I could afford to see a private pain team, which, guess what, consultations start at £300 plus, and that's just to see somebody before you start any kind of treatment plan. Specialist therapy, I would love to have a PT who understands amputees but it's out of reach, or a therapist who specialises in physical and mental trauma, just to have somebody that I can unpack things with and talk about, but it's just not an option just now. Home adaptions, for example, I've been on the council waiting list for 7 months, still not being assigned a co-worker. The car lift that would have made things better for me in my car to get my chair in was an added 6 months to an already 10-month wait. And you could only do it before you ordered the car, because after you order the car, that's going to cost you 3 to 6 grand. These aren't just extras. These can be essentials for people, things that would help me to easily live my life more comfortably and gain more independence. Something that I didn't mention on that is I would love a smart drive for my wheelchair, but those start at roughly 4.5 grand, and that is just so out of reach that it's not even on my list of needs/wants for accessibility, because it just seems light years away. And budgeting every grocery trip, going round with a scan and save, having to remove things, put things back, praying that stuff doesn't break. How do you get forward? Only 7% of homes in England meet the basic accessibility standards. In London alone, over 55,000 people are waiting for an accessible home. In Scotland, where I live, unfortunately, it is no better. Like I have just mentioned, I've been waiting 7 months for home adaptions. I missed one phone call. Awful lighting, but I'm just going with it because I'm nearly 2 hours into recording. My back's hurting. I need a piss. And I just want to get through this. And I'm going to burp again. Jeez. I missed one phone call from the council, phoned back, left my details, and that was a week and a half ago, and I still haven't heard back from them. Just one missed call, and it feels like they've just put me back down the list a bit. Until then, I do what many disabled people do, making it work, workarounds, compromises, bending myself around inaccessible spaces whilst the system takes its time. Even grants like the Disabled Facilities Grant can take months or years, or they're capped at £30,000, which sounds like a lot until you need a lift, a ramp, a wet room, new flooring, widened doors, accessible counters. You don't get to pick or choose what accessibility you need. It's all or nothing when it comes to actually living safely with a disability. But even if there's money there, what about the house in itself? It's not like there's a special safe haven of accessible, quiet flats just for disabled people. You can sometimes get supported living, but again, the spaces are tight and a lot of accessible living places goes to older people and it's an older community. I don't have a lot of stats into that, so don't take that as gospel, but often we're in mixed council housing alongside neighbours who may also be struggling, sometimes with addiction, untreated mental illness, or other challenges. For someone like me who lives with CPTSD, that uncertainty can feel really overwhelming and at times extremely triggering. When your basic shelter comes with noise, chaos, or even danger, you're not just dealing with inaccessible spaces, you're dealing with fear, vulnerable people being placed in housing that does not protect or support them, and it doesn't just fail, it re-traumatises. I had a meeting with my council where I told them that I wasn't feeling safe and a lot of things had been happening with my neighbour, and what if they get the wrong house? And 2 to 3 weeks later, I had somebody attempt to break into my house. And do you know what the council offered? Was for me to sit down and talk with the neighbour, even though it was not the neighbour that broke into my house. It was somebody that had a problem with them. And me and my neighbour don't have a problem. I've never even spoken to them. So why are you offering me this like reconciliation? And that is the only thing you've offered for the wrong house getting targeted and the neighbour's still in there and all these windows are smashed because there's just somebody that, well, probably quite a few people that have a fucking problem, and you can't even get in touch with a housing officer because they either turn their phones off, they're off on sick, or there's only 2 people covering 300 houses. Accessible housing is not a luxury. It's how we live with safety, dignity, and with some fucking ease. And that includes not just grab rails or having a ramp, but neighbourhoods that actually feel safe to sleep, eat, recover, and be outdoors. Living like this isn't just hard on the body, it is exhausting for the mind. Energy and financial budgeting is relentless. I'm always juggling, can I afford this heated blanket? What if my fridge breaks? Is there something wrong with the washing machine? What if somebody needs to go to the vets? Sometimes I don't have the money. Sometimes I don't have the energy, and sometimes it's both. That pressure of needing help but feeling like I shouldn't is draining. The decisions about where to cut corners, which bill can be delayed, how to apologise when you can't join a friend going out because you can't afford it or you're in pain, it wears you down. There's this sadness that I know that there are things that could make my life easier, but I can't afford them. Even small things like just getting away and going down to Leeds more and spending time with Eleanor and Jonathan. There are things that I'm missing out on and I've just had to be okay with. That sadness sits heavy. It's not just missing out on nice to haves, it's knowing that life could be easier, safer, or even less painful if only money was not a constant barrier. It's the frustration of having a list of things, the push rooms, the therapy sessions, a proper cushion for my wheelchair, and knowing that each one might as well be a wish list item. The hardest part is knowing that this is not unique to me, that so many disabled people are juggling finances and energy and survival in the same way that I have had to learn to, all whilst trying to find the joys in life. And when you've got chronic pain, fatigue, and trauma in the mixture, it's not just hard, it's a marathon that you didn't train for on a treadmill that doesn't stop. It just feels like it keeps going and you've got no chance but to wake up and hope that it gets better. There's still this gross narrative about people on benefits being lazy, scrounger, cheats. And even now, I'm somebody that hesitates to, like, I skip meals, but I'll hesitate to take food from food banks or community fridges, not just because there's shame there, but because of how picky I am. My sensory issues with texture, smell, and taste mean that I can't just grab a tin soup and make it work. And even when I want to push past the embarrassment, there's this guilt that someone else might need it more, that I'm taking it from someone who is worse off, and even when I'm scraping by myself. I grew up hearing the comments about people milking the system, about families on the dole who just didn't want to work. It wasn't said directly to me, but it sunk in anyway because I knew what was happening behind closed doors. It became a little voice in my head that whispered, "You're not working, you must be failing." All of the work that I have put in to break generational cycles, it feels like it could all fall apart at times. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into this financial situation, not because I wouldn't love them, but because I'd worry that they would grow up in poverty, and that's not the life that I want to pass on. And that's part of the stigma too. The idea that disabled people shouldn't have kids or shouldn't have normal lives unless they can do it all independently without support, holding down a job, juggling all the plates, and just trying to keep going. I have people who have enriched my life in so many ways, that chosen family that I've built around me, that understand me, and that is how I get through on the really hard days, as a community that I've built around me. They check in, they listen when I spiral, they sit with me when angry or ashamed or crying my heart out or just plain done. It's the difference between feeling like a burden and being reminded that I matter. I'm still anxious when the envelopes show up. I'm still scared of what's next, but I'm not facing it alone, and honestly, that is everything. If you listen to the last episode, you'll remember that I spoke a lot about my experience of growing up around benefits and trying to claw my way out of poverty. The idea that I was going to work, I was going to be a nurse, I was going to have money, and I'd be able to get a mortgage and live the kind of life that I didn't see growing up. If you hadn't heard it, it might be worth going back and taking a listen, because this next part builds on that. Back then, I didn't think that benefits were something that I associated with shame, but the hiddenness, the secrecy, everything, the anxiety and all of that came with it, it was shameful because it was something that I wanted to break away from. It's not that I saw it shameful as seeing other people on benefits as being shame, but me, myself, I didn't want that for me. It was something that I wanted away from. I wanted to make a difference. But my life changed overnight. After the accident, I found myself right back in where I had been trying to escape for so long. There were so many voices in my head in those early days, that inner critic, the stigma that I'd internalised, all telling me that I was a failure, that I was being lazy, that needing help meant that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't doing enough to get better, I must not want it enough. But the truth is, you can't predict how life turns out. You can plan, you can work hard, but things happen, bodies break, and sometimes survival is the only way forward. Recent research backs up some of this. A 2023 study published in Disability and Society found that internalised stigma among disabled people is strongly linked to increased psychological distress, low self-worth and high self-blame. And it's worse when benefits are involved, because the public conversation around deserving help can still be very toxic. When you live in a system that makes you constantly justify your need, that forces you to prove your worth over and over, it can slowly chip away at who you actually are underneath it. It can turn your life into what feels like a case file, and I know I'm not alone in this. There are common thoughts from others navigating these systems that might sound like, I'm not disabled enough to deserve this. Maybe if I just tried harder, I wouldn't need support. They think I'm lying. What if they're right? These thoughts aren't personal failures, they're learned. They come from a constant message that being disabled is being a burden and that your worth is conditional. The psychological weight of poverty and chronic illness. I think I've said it a few times in the past 2 episodes, this isn't just about the monetary value, it's about what poverty and poor health do to your sense of self. Studies from the Centre of Welfare Reform and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, like mentioned earlier, have shown that disabled people are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, not just because of their impairments, but because of the social conditions surrounding them. Isolation, financial insecurity, discrimination, the daily grind of trying to prove that you're not lying. It's this constant loop of, am I sick enough, disabled enough, struggling enough? I definitely let the voices in my head overrun what was actually true. I'd been working trying to live differently, and then I'm here on benefits, unable to work, judged for needing time to heal. And it's not just the judgment from others, but it's how we start to judge ourselves. It becomes easy to believe the worst about yourself when society keeps reinforcing the idea that you're not trying hard enough. That if you're still poor or still unwell, then it must be your fault, or you're doing something wrong, or you're spending money in the wrong areas. But the stats paint a very different story. The average wait for housing adaptations in the UK is 8 to 10 months. Autism assessments in Scotland, 3.5 years to get seen by somebody. Delays in getting prosthetics repaired or replaced can set people like me back by months, sometimes years, forcing them into worse conditions and increased resilience on others, all whilst being judged for not being further along or not being able to be more independent. The system delays you and then blames you for not being faster. And we see the same thing play out in workplaces. While the Equality 2010 Act requires employers to provide reasonable adjustments, there's no standard time frame. Some adjustments can take weeks, others months, and all of that time can be spent navigating this bureaucracy and HR and doubt. Starting a new job as a disabled person can feel like another extra full-time job on top just to be able to get the things you need in place. I stopped watching the news after COVID. The anxiety was just too much. You start protecting yourself, filtering, because every headline about benefit cheats or lazy scroungers starts to feel like a dart. And when you're already raw from fighting your body, your bank account, your own self-doubt, these darts really hit deep. A review of the major UK broadcasters, BBC, ITV, STV, Channel 4, Sky, between the years of 2021 and 2025 show that stories around benefit fraud, crackdowns and the supposed abuse of the system significantly outweigh any kind of positive stories. Headlines like 2 billion lost to benefit fraud or clamp down on fake disability claims becomes the public lens for viewing people like me. Where are the headlines about how the system is failing disabled people? Where are the stories about how many of us are one broken appliance or delayed form away from living in destitution? Even if no one says it to your face, you hear it in the silences, the whispers, the way people pause when you talk about not working, the assumption about what you're capable of, the things I could do that would help, medical cannabis, specialist physio, a wheelchair lift for my car, push rims, even a bloody heated blanket, but I can't afford any of it and I'm the one who's judged for not doing enough. And like I said, there is one massive thing that has made all of the difference to me is community. When you're disabled and navigating what feels like a very hostile system, the people who get it, they're lifelines. My friends and my chosen family help me to be more gentle with myself. Having disabled friends who got it made me feel less alone, less stuck in my own head. Social support is one of the strongest predictors of resilience. According to a 2021 report in the BMJ Open Journal, people with strong social networks experience better mental health outcomes and are more likely to engage in self-advocacy. Online communities are part of that too. From my Lazaroff frame days to now as an amputee, finding people online who share adaptions, gadgets, struggles, wins, it's validating. It is inspiring because seeing someone make it work makes me think maybe I can do it too. There's even early evidence suggesting that representation of disabled people on social media positively impacts self-esteem and reduces isolation. It makes advocacy feel less scary because you're not the only one. It can be exhausting to advocate for yourself, especially in places where you feel like you're being shut down, dismissed, or unheard. I've had to learn how to stand up for myself, but not all at once. Bit by bit by bit, there is no magic script. But if you're in this too, this fight to be seen, heard, supported, know that you don't have to do it alone. Ask a friend to help you write an appeal letter, bring someone with you to your appointment, use a voice note or a journal to plan what you want to say, get an advocate if you can, make a hospital passport or support file if you have complex needs, something that explains your condition in a way where you don't have to relive trauma every time you explain your medical history. And if all else fails, take a breath, rest, come back to it. The system is a maze and it is okay to pause if you feel like you've hit a brick wall. I'm not here because I gave up. I'm here because I didn't, and even when I wanted to, even when it feels at times that the world will never change, I found strength somewhere to keep going. And I believe that if you are experiencing this too, so will you, because we're not the problem, the system is. So what would it look like to fix it, to build a system that treats disabled people with respect, empathy, and care? Let us look at what it might be like to dream, but also be a little bit practical. Talk about policy possibilities and what a welfare state rooted in justice could actually be for the UK. We've talked a lot about the problems, the delays, the stigma, the shame, the mental gymnastics. But what if we flipped it? What if we asked, what would a welfare system rooted in justice, dignity, and humanity actually look like? Because it shouldn't feel like a hot take to suggest that disabled people deserve to live, not just survive. And yet, here we are. Let's take a bit of a deeper look at what some other countries are doing, because the UK isn't the only one with a benefit system, but it often feels like it's the one that most prides itself on making people suffer for needing help. These comparisons aren't about pretending that other systems are flawless, but they give us a glimpse into what could be possible and what other places are trying. I guess for the podcast, if you are somebody who is a resident of one of these places and you claim disability benefits, or you know somebody who does, leave a comment or get in touch with me to cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com, because I would love to hear what your real life experience is rather than me just sitting researching on the internet. First up, we have Norway. In Norway, disability and sickness benefits are linked to a living wage. People receive around 66% of their previous income or a national base rate if they weren't working. It's enough to live on, not just to scrape by. And mostly, it's automatic. You get signed off, the process begins, you aren't interrogated or forced to prove that you're unwell repeatedly. There's an underlying assumption of honesty, something that seems pretty absent within the UK. A 2022 OECD report found that Norway's model leads to better long-term outcomes for disabled people, including higher rates of social participation, reduction in reliance on crisis services, and better mental health indicators. Importantly, this system reduces administrative costs because it doesn't funnel public money into excessive reassessment and appeals like the UK does. For those wondering how this comparison will look in real terms, in Norway, if someone was previously earning an average wage which is around 550,000 NOK per year, which is £26,400 annually on disability benefits. For someone who wasn't working and they get the national base rate, this is about 223,000 NOK, which is £16,200, which is still above the UK's Universal Credit Standard allowance. This income is bolstered by other social supports like housing assistance, subsidised transport and capped energy prices. In practice, this means that someone who earned a minimum wage prior to needing support would still receive an income that they could live on without falling into being destitute. Someone who wasn't working at all still has a baseline of support that reflects a dignified life. And for those in higher but still attainable income brackets, such as nurses or teachers that earn around 600,000 NOK, £43,000, their benefits maintain a proportionate stability and allow for realistic adjustment to life with disability. And yes, Norway does have a higher cost of living, but its public services cover so much more: healthcare, dental, public transport, education, that your income isn't constantly being drained by the basics. Compared to the UK, where many disabled people live below the poverty line despite receiving benefits, Norway's approach offers both dignity and practical support. Its higher cost of living is offset by the robust public services, which means your money stretches further, and crucially, your worth isn't being questioned because you need help. In Germany, there is an offer of a comprehensive care insurance system with a strong focus on home adaptation, in-home care and long-term support. There's a cultural understanding that disability is not a personal failure, it's a part of life that society is responsible for supporting. Unlike the private care insurance model within the United States, which often relies heavily on individual out-of-pocket payments, employer-linked insurance and complex billing, Germany's system is publicly funded and ensures that care is accessible regardless of personal wealth. It isn't perfect, but it reflects a more collective, rights-based approach rather than a market-driven one. In contrast to the US model, where people can be bankrupted by healthcare, just shows how dangerous it can be when support systems are based on profit rather than the person's need. Finland has trialled universal basic income, and while it was short-term, the data received from it was powerful. Participants had better mental health, lower stress, and increased motivation to seek work or education. That's right, giving people money with no strings attached actually helped them thrive. Wow, no threats, no conditionality, just trust and support. Meanwhile, in the UK, you get penalised for saving, punished for surviving, and made to jump through endless hoops to get help. The systems are complex by design. The support is conditional, means-tested, and often humiliating. It's not built for well-being, it's built to gatekeep resources. Bureaucracy becomes a wall, not a bridge. No wonder that the quality of life in the UK for disabled people ranks lower than in many European counterparts, because when your benefits come with a side order of surveillance, judgment, or having to be precautious, it's hard to feel anything but exhausted. A 2022 study published by the journal Social Policy and Administration found that disabled people in the UK are significantly more likely to experience food insecurity, housing instability, and chronic financial stress compared to peers in countries with more generous, unconditional social support systems. The research highlighted how conditional welfare, complex application procedures, and a culture of suspicion in the UK contribute to worsening mental health outcomes, increased isolation, and reducing long-term quality of life. The study also noted that the cumulative effect of repeated reassessment, delays in benefit payments, and inadequate financial support often lead to disabled people in the UK feeling dehumanised and disempowered. There's always this little whisper that says, well, at least we have some support. You should be grateful. But here's the thing, gratitude should not be used to silence critique. It shouldn't be seen as complaining when we want more than the bare minimum to survive. Talking about finances publicly can feel scary, especially when you're on benefits, especially when you have an online presence, because visibility actually can create another mark against you. If you have the energy to post, you must have the energy to work, right? Other than the fact that I've been sitting here for 2 hours, my back is absolutely aching. Anytime I move, I need to inhale because it's so sore. I'm starting to get hungry, which means I need to make food after this, but I need to make food after this because I know I'm going to crash out for hours, and if I don't eat before, I'm not going to eat after, and it's going to be a skipped meal. So is that really somebody that can work when 2 hours totally crashes you out? Probably not, but who's to say what assessors think is right? There's even been talk about DWP monitoring social media accounts and discussion of open banking being used to check claimants' spending habits. Imagine living in fear that buying yourself a takeaway or saving £20 could flag yourself for reassessment. For some people, this could already be happening. Random reassessments triggered by the vaguest reasons. In 2023, a leaked memo suggested that social media lifestyle evidence could be used to open fraud investigations. What counts as evidence? A holiday photo? A smiling selfie? A TikTok from your bed? This is not support, it's surveillance. And at what point did it stop being support and start being punishment for being alive with a disability? So what if we stopped assuming that fraud was the default? What if the system began to form from a place of trust? What if assessments were trauma-informed, holistic, and led by professionals who understand the realities of chronic illness and disability? What if benefits weren't tied to degradation and judgment, but seen as a right, like healthcare or education? What if disabled people were automatically assessed for the higher rate and then adjusted if necessary, rather than the other way around? What if open banking was banned from being used to monitor claimant spending? What if everyone had access to free adaptions without a 6-month waitlist? What if every disabled person had access to a benefits advisor, advocate, and mental health support? What if universal basic income was trialled in areas with high disabled rates and high low income rates? What if the cost of living was adjusted to reflect the real price of disability, related needs, from medical cannabis to heated blankets, mobility aids, adaptive tech and transport? What if we stopped treating disabled people's visibility as proof against them and started valuing the courage that it takes to show up and speak up for yourself at all? And this is all what ifs. This is dreaming of possibilities. But do you know what? For me, dreaming doesn't feel pointless. It can be a blueprint, a refusal to accept the scraps and call them a feast. It also does make me wonder if episodes like this could truly make a difference, or if I just sound like I'm moaning, ranting, screaming into the void. But the truth is, it has been building in me for months, like that offshoot. Talking about money, the reality of life on benefits is hard, and I know that I'm not alone. And I hope that someone listening to this episode feels less alone too. Because even if things don't change tomorrow or next week or next month, talking about it matters. Being visible matters. Being angry and irate and upset that this is a system that we live under matters, because you're not lazy, you're not a burden, and you're not the problem. The system is. And it feels cliche for me to say that, but it is something that I have been saying since I started doing this podcast, and it's not going to change unless the system changes. So maybe the first step to having changes is people being brave enough and daring to say it out loud. So friends, thank you for coming with me on this deep, emotionally charged, rambly, ranty, frustrating and honest journey with me. Whether you have lived through it or just listened to learn, thank you so much for being here. In this episode, I think I really looked at what a welfare system rooted in justice could look like and explore how other countries are doing it better, how shame and surveillance are baked into our system, and why we have to imagine that more is possible. Looking into a deep dive of fear, precautions, punishments that so many of us face, and daring to imagine a world where dignity isn't rationed. This is part 2 of a little mini series if you missed the last episode, where I explored the emotional, financial and physical toll of navigating poverty when I was younger, what that looks like day to day, how stigma sneaks into your self-perception, and how, like in this episode, community can be a lifeline. The two really do go hand in hand, and if you've found this one helpful or informative or even just interesting to listen to in the background whilst you're playing a game on your phone, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to the first part. Episodes like these are vulnerable for me to make, but they feel like they're valuable too. And if they resonate with you, please consider following the podcast, sharing it, and leaving a review on audio platforms, 5 stars if you can. It really helps the message that I'm trying to say, that disability is hard and living in a system that keeps you down can feel harder, but there's voices that are out there that if you need a bit of support, there's people that can hold your hand until you can do it for yourself. If you have any thoughts, reflects or stories, you can leave them down below in the comments on YouTube, or you can send me an email to cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. Your lived experiences are as powerful as mine are, and your voice is needed too. Before we go, if you have made it to the end of this 2-part deep dive, what would your version of a just and supportive welfare system look like? Until next time, take care of yourselves. Remember that you are doing more than enough. You are never a burden. You never have been. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.